Hi, I'm Will Wilcher with Lotus West Properties, and today we're going to talk about tenants breaking leases. Think a tenant can't break a lease agreement without penalties? Think again. A lease is a legally binding agreement between the tenant and the landlord. Breaking that lease can place the tenant in potentially significant legal trouble, as they could be sued for rent owed on the lease or a breach of agreement, and possibly even have an eviction placed on their public record. That eviction could wreak havoc with the tenant's credit score and ability to rent another unit for at least 7 years. That's the length of time an eviction remains on record. However, there are times when a tenant has the right to break a lease without being held liable for any damages or unpaid rent. In these situations, the landlord may be legally at fault, and the tenant may have no other choice but to break the lease. As a landlord, there are some situations that are simply just out of your control. You're going to have to be prepared to roll with the punches, even if you've done everything you could to make sure your tenants are content with your rental property. So the following are some of the situations in which a tenant has the legal right to terminate a lease agreement earlier than the terms set forth in the contract. Number 1, habitability violations. Any landlord is obligated to provide the tenant a clean and safe unit for the length of the agreement. That means ensuring the unit complies with all health and safety codes, running water is available day and night, and the common areas are clean and kept in working order. This is the bare minimum a landlord must meet to steer clear of any violations that would induce a tenant to break the lease. If the landlord fails to meet these standards, the tenant may first complain directly to the landlord to try to get the problems fixed. But if that fails, the tenant may then file a complaint with a local health and safety board, at which point an inspector or an official could come by and audit the property. If they rule in favor of the tenant, the lease can be broken in writing. If it gets to this point, the landlord has no legal recourse to pursue damages from the tenant. So simply put, a landlord who fails to provide habitable residence is asking for trouble. When they do get it in the form of a tenant's written intent to vacate the premises prior to the lease ending, you'll have no one really for them to blame but themselves. Not only will the landlord be left then with an empty unit, but in cases where the unit did not meet the legal requirements set forth by the law, the landlord could be on the hook financially for helping the tenant find a new place to live. So, number 2, harassment. There is another instance where a landlord's actions can result in the unit being left vacant prior to the end of the lease term. Every state has strict privacy rights to protect the tenant occupying rental property. And if a landlord demonstrates a pattern of violating those rights, they can be held liable for that behavior, and the tenant will have a legal right to break the lease. So one action landlords might not realize qualifies as harassment is attempting to enter the unit without giving reasonable advance, usually 24 to 48 hours depending on the state. Even after giving notice, the landlord really has no legal right to enter a unit other than to make repairs or show the unit to new tenants in the event that the current tenant is vacating the premises. Other forms of harassment include communicating with the tenant in an aggressive or threatening manner, or removing doors or windows inside the unit, changing the locks, or turning off the unit's water or heat. If a landlord has a dispute with the tenant, these actions are not the way to reach a civil resolution. Number 3, tenant matters. In some states, California in particular, laws provide the tenants with the ability to legally break a lease agreement under certain conditions in which the tenant and the landlord may have little control over the situation. Here are 2 of those conditions. Number 1, active military duty. Now, if a tenant is called to serve in the active military, a lease agreement can legally be broken. Stipulations include that the tenant must be part of the Armed Forces, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or the National Guard. The tenant must provide the landlord written intent to end the lease agreement early. Number 2, victim of domestic violence. A tenant or member of the tenant's household who has become a victim of domestic or sexual abuse has the legal right to terminate a lease agreement early. Eligibility criteria may vary though from state to state, and written notice may still be required. So, let me leave you with this. The tenant-landlord relationship is vital to the success of any rental property. This is one of the most valuable lessons I've learned in this business. Treat your tenants right, and they will do the same. That honestly means having transparency and respect for boundaries and dealing with your tenants on any matter. It's up to you to offer the best possibilities for rental units to retain your tenants for the long term. I don't care how competitive the housing market may be, constant turnover from one tenant to the next is really just not good for business. After all, an income property only generates revenue when it's occupied. Tenant retention should be the number 1 priority for any property owner and manager. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.